um, I'm going to move around a bit because I have to, and that's just how God made me, I guess. you know. So I hope that's okay. Don't get too dizzy or anything. I won't go too fast. I can't. But we're going to look more at discipleship. So far, Grady kicked us off, if you remember. Warren had a great lesson. Brian's had a great lesson. Oh, well, thank you, sir. That's not for me to say. I know I did try to get an entire book done in one class, which was really rough. This time, I was granted 3 weeks to get through one book. So we're going to slow it down just a little. And I hope that's a good thing. And I even have some good news. Once I remember how to turn everything on, I even have some good news. If you remember, there was no quiz last week, right? So everybody thank Brian. There was no quiz last week. I have some more good news. There's no quiz next week. So. Probably. It depends on how we do this time. We do have a quiz this week. It's an easy one, I think, I hope. So today's pop quiz, in the psych world, we call it a random interval reinforcement, not a pop quiz. So if you're a student and that causes a little trauma for you, just think of it as a random interval reinforcement. So first one, what's a disciple? 3 parts. Who remembers? Oh boy. I'm putting everybody on the spot at once. So it's collective risk. It's not just in you. Anybody? What's a disciple? Based on our definition the last 4 weeks. Follower of Jesus. There, Miss Edna's on. She's got the first part. Boom. And that's like the big part. Someone who's being changed by Jesus, right? Because remember, I tell my students this all the time. If we come to class and we don't remember anything a week later, did we really come to class? Maybe it was the teacher. Yeah, that could be part of it. Someone who's following Jesus, someone who's being changed by Jesus, and someone who is on the mission of Jesus. There we go. Whew. Okay, we'll get there. Well, then what's a disciple maker? Just a disciple who enters into relationships with the intention of helping the other person be a follower of Jesus, be changed by Jesus, and be on the mission of Jesus. So those 3 are key parts. Now, I don't know, based on that one, this one's going to be tougher too. 4 main types and focuses of churches. So let me help with this one a little bit more. This is the idea of where most churches focus their attention and kind of do things, right? So there's the educational focus, where the methodology is come and learn, the function. The organic, the home kind of thing, where it's come and fellowship, just hang out together. And then there's the attractional, kind of the magic show, lights and concert and stuff, right? Come and see. And then the missional, which is come and serve. That's the function. And all of them have great, well, most of them have really good aspects to them, right? But we're trying to go from good, better to best, and they all seem to miss something, right? For the educational one, there's a saying. What we win people with is what we win them to. So if we win people with an educational focus and a come and learn function, that's what they're going to think discipleship is, right? So if we say, oh, just bring a friend, and hopefully someday eventually that one friend in that one church will become a Christian. Well, that new Christian is going to think that's how it's done, right? So that's kind of the drawback for educational, because that's not really the full scope of the biblical definition and example that Jesus gives us on discipleship. It's just not all of it, right? He definitely, his apostles definitely brought people to come and see, and those people brought people to come and see, but it was more than that than just coming and learning or coming and seeing. Even the missional, we can be so focused up in what we're doing that we don't have the heart behind it and the intention of helping people focus on Jesus. And it's good to help people. God calls us to help people, so please don't Don't misunderstand. And then the home fellowship is great. I love that, but it can also be very insular and very exclusionary. It's just us without any outreach. So what's ours? Or what's the one we're trying to build? What's our focus? Biblical discipleship. That's our focus. Biblical discipleship. And our methodology is relational environments, because that's how Jesus did it. That's how we see it in the New Testament. That's what Jesus did. He had relational environments, and Warren and Brian both talked about this at some length, the stages of discipleship. And does anybody remember any of those? The stages of being a disciple? Dead, then infant, baby, child, young adult, and then a parent, right? Those were those 5 stages. But when we talk about relational environments, that was last week? Yeah, last week. And we'll talk about that in a second, how we normally do it and how Jesus did it. And a little bit of a bonus, does every follower of Jesus make it to the parent stage of discipleship? We had infant, we had dead, we had baby, we had child, we had young adult, and then we had parent. Does everybody make it over here? Go like this. Go like this. Look at your neighbor and go, no. But that is the goal. That is the goal. And so everyone should be trying to move to that next step, but often they're going to need somebody to help them along the way, just like a child needs some help, right? As cute as they are, some people say they are that cute, so we encourage them to live, especially when they're teenagers. We remember how cute they were, and that helps us keep them going, as parents maybe. Sorry, Emma. As cute as they were, that helps. But they need help, and that falls on discipleship, because we have to remember, too, discipleship isn't just getting the dead to be babies, right? It's about getting everyone from this level down the way to where they can be parents, where they can be disciple makers, not just disciples. So let me share with you something real quick. It just kind of hit me yesterday. Look, anytime I say something like that, I get to look out in the audience to see my wife go, she gets that, oh, here we go. So there's a large body of evidence out there, scientific evidence, that documents that secondhand smoke exposure produces significant, substantial, and immediate effects on the cardiovascular system. We know that, right? That's not a surprise now. How many of you remember planes and trains where people smoked in the plane or the train or on the bus, right? That secondhand smoke everywhere, right? I remember that, but even brief exposure, according to this documentation, can result in acute changes. And somebody made the comment to me yesterday around the dinner table about secondhand smoke, but what about secondhand Jesus? How many people, think about it, it just hit me, right? The secondhand smoke exposure produces significant, substantial, immediate effects on the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system, right, is your heart and your blood, what you need to live. I wonder how many of us can say that secondhand Jesus has made a significant, substantial, and immediate impact on our cardiovascular system, on our hearts, on our lives. And if it has, are we providing people with secondhand Jesus? Right? We're not Jesus. We tell people all the time, if there's anything good in me, it comes from him. When we've done good works, we point to the Father in heaven, because that's where all good things come from. So only follow me or imitate me as I'm imitating Christ. So hopefully we're providing some secondhand Jesus to people in how we live, in our discipleship nature. And that's kind of where we're going with this, because we're going to talk about culture here in just a second. Last part of the quiz, 5 levels of relational discipleship. Remember? PSP, T, D. That's how I remember it. So public was in large groups, hundreds of people. Social was more in that 70 to 100 range. And then P, the next one, was personal, like our care groups, right? Our care groups. Oh, care group. Who was in the care group with the Varvels last week? Anybody else here from that? I was going to give you one of these, Trent, just because. The personal. Then we get to the transparent. That's the part, I think, well, I'll get that in a second. Transparent and then divine, right? So which one has the Western church generally focused on? Public and social, right? Something between 70 and hundreds of people, right? Which one seems to be the most effective or vital in making disciples who make disciples? The transparent, where it's 3 or 4 people. And it's the one that we focus on maybe the least. I mean, at least from up here. And the cool part to me is that Jesus worked in all of those, but we see the real transformation of people down in the transparent, right? Maybe at the personal, but when he drills down and gets these big crowds, normally that's when he has his harshest, strictest teaching, right? Is when there's thousands of people and he lays it out for them pretty hardcore. It's not come and see at first, right? They might think, oh, it's going to be come and see, but then he tells them, right? You've heard it said, but I say to you. He takes the old law and makes it a heart matter, takes it further, deeper than just a behavior. Out of your heart is where your behavior flows from. So he takes it back to that. But when we see him with his apostles, when we see him with the 3 or 4 that were super closest with him, when he takes them up for the transfiguration with him to see that, we see those men transformed in ways they probably wouldn't have been if they had just been part of the crowd that had been fed by the 5,000, or that where he fed 5,000 people. So we see that. And I think in your life, if you really think about it, the most transformative discipleship you ever had probably is in a more transparent setting, right? Not at some massive event, not at some church with 300, 400 people in it. You may hear a great lesson, maybe not. maybe you'll have a great class, maybe you won't. But when you're together with 3 or 4 people who are striving to be disciples, to hold each other accountable, to build each other up, encourage one another, to follow Jesus, to be changed by him and to be on his mission, that's where we get more and more transformation. And we go from this dead or infant over here to a parent, right? That's where those things happen, I think, and I see. So what do we mean when we talk about the culture of a church? We're talking about change in culture and organizational change and family change, and I think I even said last time how if you're going and having a family meeting and you got like 5 or 6 kids and you say, hey, I know we always go to Galveston, kids, for vacation, but this year we're going somewhere else. Half the kids go, oh, what? Right? And half the kids say, oh, yay, I want to try something new. But imagine that, right, with 200 people. It's tough to steer that big of a ship, right? Culture. So culture for us right now, the way we're looking at it, it's just the way a church naturally functions under no pressure. The way a church just naturally functions, right? So what do we focus on? What do we care about? What do we talk about? When there's no crisis, what's the emphasis, right? We're trying to get it to where our emphasis is discipleship. And this isn't, There's been a lot of research done on churches who actually make disciples, right? We're not talking about just adding people who move in from somewhere else who are already going to church. We're not talking about just getting people baptized. We're talking about taking people from death to life, to parenthood, right? To being disciple makers. The churches who do that, leaders in those churches, the research conducted, there are about 5 traits, characteristics that actual churches that make disciples have. Seem to be like the 5 commonalities that they have. But before we even get into those 5, I want to remind us that culture eats strategy for breakfast. This isn't a program. If this is just a program or just a curriculum, it's not going to have the impact it should. It's not going to be what it needs to be to reach the lost in this community. It's not going to be what it needs to be to really reflect what Christ did, right? Did Jesus treat all of his apostles exactly the same? No, right? He knew that Peter was a knucklehead. I mean, he knew, right? And maybe he knew that because he was God. Maybe he knew that because he spent so much time with Peter, right? That's the human part that I can relate to more easily. And maybe the knucklehead part too, but that's another story. He treated them differently because it was about being a disciple maker, not about a program, right? And I know for me, having some structure helps, right, Amy? Yeah. She's looking at me like, yeah, like when you say, I thought about this morning, now I'm going to, she's like, ooh. Some structure is good for us. We need some structure, and sometimes that's a great foundation to build from, right? But when we talk about culture, it is who we are, what we do, not just a curriculum, okay? I want to make sure we're all together on that. Is it easier to change a culture or to build a culture from scratch? Do you know? Have you thought about it? What do you think? Starting a company, is it easier to start a company and have like a new culture, or is it easier to go into a company that's existed for 20, 30, 50, 100 years and change the culture? Start a new one. One of the things that I'm going to do in the next 3 weeks is share a little more personal stuff than just from the book. The toughest, okay, the toughest times we had to deal with people overseas when we were trying to be disciple makers was when we got somewhere and there had already been people there who reached out to them. And we thought that would be easier. Oh, you've already had Bible studies, you've already been in some kind of a house church, right? We thought, oh, perfect. Come on in, let's keep it rolling. And what we found was it was so much more difficult to focus on disciple making with them because they already had an understanding, a culture that they understood. For example, you ready for an example? Let's see. All right. I try to avoid these sometimes because I don't want to be like always, back in the foreign country, right? But I think this is relevant. For example, what's this? Collection plate, easy, right? Okay, so when you're in a secret house church, is it a good idea to have those at church, do you think, maybe, during your secret house church meeting? How about this? What's this? Podium. Good idea to have in an apartment house church, do you think? Probably not. It's kind of in the way. It doesn't really make sense, especially when there's 20 of you in an apartment room as small as the kitchen over here, right? So we found people who lovingly and welcomed into our house church that had been churched by other people and very concerned that we weren't a real church because we didn't have one of these. Now again, this is in a foreign country with no understanding of Christianity, no real religious culture to speak of, right? We're talking about culture. There's a group that someone had brought them the right kind. Actually, it wasn't even a plate, right? It was an old velvet bag with a little wooden handle. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I didn't grow up in church, so I didn't even know what that was. All I knew was this one, right? But they were very concerned that we weren't scripturally accurate or good Christians because we didn't have that. Because some foreigner I say it lovingly, explained to them that that was important, required, and part of church culture. And so was this thing. Now, when people came and knocked on my door and wanted to see my papers or ask what was happening, I really didn't want to have this in the living room. Now, did that mean that I was trying to, was I denying Christ or something? I don't think so. I'm not sure how many of these he used, quite honestly. But that was the culture but the people that we met and worked with from scratch, from zero, who were drawn in oftentimes because of love, just to be honest, they, with no culture, they were the ones reaching out to people because they saw that's how it was done. What we won them with, we reached out to them, showed them love, imperfectly. Please don't, we were not great sometimes, but with love and with service. That was another one. Those were the local people who were bringing their friends. Those were the local people who were seeing, oh, this is important. And when they became Christians, the amount of joy, the amount of understanding of what they had come from to what they had now was so great they couldn't help it. Even when we were a little nervous, right? On a Friday night Bible study, this young woman starts bringing people she found on the bus. And we're like, do you know them? She's like, well, I mean, we met on the bus, so, I figured. And I was like, oh, I love you. And that's amazing. And I have no way of knowing if they're part of a party or the government. Like, okay, great. So we just prayed an awful lot that God would just keep eyes closed that didn't need to see in that moment and work on the hearts of everyone who did see, But those were the people. I told you the story too before, I think, but I think it's so relevant. A young couple who gets baptized. They're so excited. They're so on fire. We baptized one couple in a hotel pool because we didn't have enough. We didn't have right, speaking of not having this or collection plates that are right, we certainly didn't have a baptistry, right? We used our bathtub an awful lot, but we needed to go to this hotel pool. And they were so funny. Our son was about 6 or 7. We used him to distract the lifeguard on duty. Like, go over there and play. And they're like, oh, look, a little foreign boy. And right? But when a couple gets to know Jesus in that way, and it's a discipleship kind of environment, it's not just a program. But within a few months, right, this couple is clearly upset about something. And like, what's wrong? And they're like, oh, it's been 4 months and we haven't brought anyone to Jesus yet. Isn't that sense of urgency? I don't have the numbers. I didn't look ahead to find out how many people we've had the honor and joy and privilege of baptizing this year. I don't know. But man, can you imagine having that kind of sense of urgency? And they were infants, and they were trying to be parents right now. Oftentimes we had to slow them down a little, right? Help them get where they needed to get foundationally to keep going. But just that spirit, man, it's beautiful. So it's not a strategy. And even when you implement, I bet many of you have been in environments and in some work experience somewhere where a new program has started at work. Have you ever had that, right? You had to sit through some wild training or something, and it's we're going to roll out this new initiative, and everybody's going to, and like 6 months later, kind of nobody was really doing it, right? Because it wasn't part of your culture at your job. It wasn't. That's why we talk about this culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have all of these cool programs and stuff, but if it's not really built into what we do, how we all navigate life together on a regular basis, none of those programs are going to matter. It's just not. here are the 5 things, and we have a bit more to get into, but here are the 5 things that churches who actually make disciples, this is what they have. This is what they do. These are their traits, their characteristics, however you want to phrase it. One is that they're compassionate. They have love in action, right? Splagnizomai, right? This old Greek word that means love that compels, like love from the gut, right? From deep in here, right? Because we say heart. They used to say gut was where the seat of your emotions were way back then. And it's a compassion, a love that compels you to action, right? Not just sit around and talk about it, not just learn about it. I have to do something. They're inclusive. And I think we remember this, right? God accepted people as they were. He accepted me where I was, and I was not in a great state. I got to be honest with you. But he loves them too much to leave them there, and that goes back to that transformation, right? That goes back to that transformation, following Jesus, being changed by Jesus. If Jesus didn't need to change us, like we would already be where we need to be. You're hopefully not the same as you were 20 years ago. So 1 or 2 of you aren't even 20 maybe, but you've grown, you've changed. But God loved you here, right? We're talking about dead to parent. He loved me here. I know that. And I can look back and see it. I can see it every day, that he loved me here, and he loves our neighbors when they're there. He loves the people that we don't even maybe like too much for whatever reason. But churches who make disciples do this, and they love them enough to not leave them there. They're sacrificial. They demonstrate a willingness to give up my plans for other people. I think of Jesus all the time, right? I think of studies done about Good Samaritan stuff and why people stop to help somebody and why they don't. They did a great study at a seminary. They had somebody on a park bench, basically, seemingly either maybe ill or homeless, in need of help, clearly. And people just walking by, and they just kind of counted how many people just walked by. And these were at one version of it they did at a seminary, like on the campus somewhere, and people just keep going. The people who stopped were the people that didn't have a class right now, the people who didn't have something going on in that moment. But if everybody was too busy, they just kept walking. And now, I mean, I've seen this with bystander effect stuff, something I teach all the time, every semester, of people at subway stations, and they've done this. Somebody just kind of keels over at a big subway station. The last one I'm thinking of was in London, and people just walked by, and they just timed it and watched, and this person kind of moaning a little bit, grabbing their side. 15 minutes go by. Hundreds of people walk by. Nobody stops. And I look at that and I think, oh, how many times have I not stopped? Right? It's easy to initially think, oh, those people are terrible, they should stop, right? It's more difficult for me to think about how many times I've done that. How can I not? But churches who make disciples are sacrificial. They give up their plans and take the time out to go, whoa, somebody needs me. Somebody needs Jesus. Also, they're vulnerable. This is where it gets a little more difficult for some of us, right? None of this is easy, I got to admit. None of this is like, woohoo, But I think the closer we get to being like Jesus, letting him change us, the more easy this becomes. But vulnerable, I'm flawed, imperfect, and you can share your flaws as well. Having an authentic life, not trying to put a perfect facade out. People don't relate to that, do they? I don't think so. How many of you aren't perfect? This is a chance for everybody to move a little. Okay, yeah, okay, good. People that are over here need to see that as we reach out to them. Infants need to see that. Children and young adults need to see that. And then Spirit-filled, right? We've been talking about the fruit of the Spirit for a while, but the fruit of the Spirit, that it's growing and evident in us, being conformed to the image of God, includes being full of the Spirit, and that comes out in our goodness, kindness, patience, all of it, right? All those fruits people can see And those are the 5 things that churches who make disciples have. Nationwide, that's what they have. So yeah, we're going to be looking at how we can do some of these very challenging things here, adjusting our church culture to one that's more focused around disciple making. You ready? Everybody still with me? So, okay. Whew. Go like this if you need to. Shake it out a little. There we go. Okay. All right. So all the books we've been reading. This is part 1 of this. There's 3 parts. The first one is intentional leadership. This isn't something. This isn't something we can delegate. This isn't something that we can just set up a program for, like I said. Okay. Some of you've heard this once or twice. Some of you haven't. Living it. This is, so when we talk about living it, communicating it, pruning it, all these things, this is the one that we can all do. And this is something that leadership is focused on here, actually doing this. And some of the elders have been doing this for a long, long time. In very intentional ways, in reaching out to people, in trying to disciple people, right? But my introduction to Jesus was not in a program. It was not in a youth group. It wasn't even in a church. Just totally honest with you. It was in 2 houses. More specifically, it was in 2 families. They did not have a program. They did not have a workbook. They did not have any strategy per se other than to be like Jesus to this knucklehead, 18-year-old, 17, I guess 17 when they first took me in, I'll say it that way. So 2 families, and I got to see Jesus. And I got to see love like I had never seen before. I got to see a mom and a dad love each other and their kids, even when things weren't good, even when things were challenging, in a way I had never seen before. I got to see them treat me with love and respect and mercy and grace when I would stay at their house for days on end. Even every once in a while when one of the moms would look at her son and go, "How long is Buster going to stay this time?" But I got to see them, and they discipled me. From here, maybe even from over here, up to here, to being an infant, to being baptized. One of those dads baptized me. One of the first times I went to church with them, these 2 families, I didn't know exactly that one of those boys' dads was the preacher. Now, mind you, I'd been in their house several times. It wasn't like he was hiding it. I just didn't understand a lot of what was happening in that realm of the world, all right, and that idea. But we sat right over here in a church very similar to this. And I was like, oh my goodness, because I was just hanging out there for the whole weekend. And David was like, well, I mean, we're going to church. Wake up, right? We're going to church. I was like, oh, why, right? And he's like, we go to church every Sunday. I was like, okay, fine, whatever, right? I didn't have a car with me, so I was kind of stuck. So I just went. We'd been playing ball all weekend, went to the movies, did all this stuff. And we get up and we go, and I'm sitting over there, and a couple songs happen, and then David's dad gets up and walks up and sits. They had a little pew here, right? Like a little mini pew. I don't know if you've seen those. And he sits up there, and as he gets up and starts walking up, at first I'm like, oh, he's got to go to the bathroom, right? And then he keeps going, and he sits up here on the stage, and I'm like, oh, David, what is your dad doing? He's like, he's working. I was like, huh? And then he starts praying, and I was like, oh boy, everything bad I'd done in his house, right? In his car, anything oh man, I was like, oh. Then I'm looking at his mom's kind of looking at me like, The other family, right, was great. They took care of me that my senior year of high school. My senior year of high school was not great. And Christmas rolls around, and it wasn't good at my house, so Ben, the other family, Ben realized that. He said, hey man, why don't you come over to our place for Christmas? I'm 17, right? Talking about sacrifice, right? They had family time. They had things scheduled. Ben said, well, Mom said you could come over, Mama Galloway. I was like, okay, cool, because I didn't want to be at home. I didn't want to be at home at Christmas, right? I get there, and the whole family's there, and I'm just kind of sitting off to the side there giving me food, and everybody's having fun, and there's like, Ben had like 5 or 6 older brothers and sisters, and they had kids, some of them, and all these kids are everywhere. Mama Galloway, Papa Galloway's there, eating, and I'm seeing them, and they're all sitting around, and the kids are getting excited because there's presents under the tree and stuff, and I'm just kind of amazed, trying not to cry, seeing this. And then it got better. Ben goes, oh, hey, there's like 2 things under here for you. I was like, huh? You didn't even know I was coming. Oh, yeah, but there's... And I'm sure it was for one of the other kids. Now, looking back, it was like, we were in Orlando, right? So it was like an Orlando Magic t-shirt and something else. But there was my name on a box, a wrapped present. And like I said, I'm sure that was really supposed to be someone else's. And they just took that name off and put mine on there because they were trying to be Jesus. That's not in a workbook, right? I opened the presents and kind of lost it, and then felt really embarrassed, right? But they all loved me. And that was when I first saw Jesus. So this is something that we have to live, right? I said that's in brief. I guess maybe it wasn't as brief, but it's still pretty brief because there's way more to it than that. But again, it's not a curriculum. It's not a program. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul talks about this. And he's kind of talking about false teachers and stuff, but I think it hits at this too. Paul writes, the Corinthian church, I'm afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the sincere or simple and pure devotion to Christ. Simple and pure is kind of how Paul describes it to them. He's worried about them getting false teacher, all this stuff. But I was focusing on simple and pure in this. This is simple. And I don't think, sometimes we over-intellectualize it, right? I was going to have everybody write on a card if they thought which of those types of churches we were, right? Come and see, come and learn, those different things. But I know that it can be easy to over-intellectualize this discipleship. Intellectualize, well, I have to know everything. We would explain to people overseas, you don't have to know everything to share everything you know. Because while some were itching and raring to go, some were like, oh, this is so important, and it is, that I have to know the Bible from the front to the back before I can say anything to anyone. Like, no, man. You don't have to know everything to share everything you know. You don't have to know everything to live out what we do know. And we see Jesus explain that to Peter often. What do you know to do? Well, do it. What are we talking about? Okay, do it. But I don't understand, Jesus. Yeah, I know you don't understand. He's like, I know you don't understand, trust me. But what you do know, do it. So we can, simple and pure, we can get overly emotional, we can get overly intellectual and miss what Jesus wants us to do, that it's simple. So the trick is then, are we going to be about it or not? It's not, I don't know, growing up I always used to hear that. You're gonna talk about it or be about it. Normally a fight was about to break out, so that's a little different. But it's something that we need to be and see and show in simple and purity, simple ways and purity of heart. This isn't, Emma, it's not rocket science, right? And it isn't something we can delegate. I'm running out of time, I know. It's something that we hope to replicate, even if we can't delegate it. I don't know if you know this, so 10 years ago, research came out, there's about 1,700 pastors, preachers, ministers quit every month in this country. That's from 10 years ago. Mostly from burnout. 90% of them were working 55 to 70 hours a week. This isn't something that we can get one person to do. It's just not. It's not the way Jesus had it. Jesus explained that, right, he had all authority, all power, and he told all of them, go and make disciples. Earlier this year, there was an event called Baptize America. 30,000 people were baptized all at the same day. Thousands were baptized in Pirate Cove, where the Jesus Revolution movie that some of us watched a few years back, where that happened in the 70s. There are more Gen Z men attending church now than Gen Z women. There's more males than females going to church now. And I know not here, but recent Barna research is showing as well, Gen Z and millennials are in church monthly more often than boomers and Gen X.